Every triangle has three sides, three angles, and all three angles added together equal 180 degrees. Every triangle, three sides, three angles, all three angles added together add up to 180 degrees. In chapter 9, we reviewed or covered several different ways to solve for missing sides and angles of right triangles. The first way that we exposed you to was the Pythagorean Theorem, which stated a squared plus b squared equals c squared, where a and b do not, or you can say don't, matter the placement. What matters is C is always opposite the 90-degree angle. That's Pythagorean theorem. The next thing we showed you was special right triangles. Where we had 45, 45, 90-degree triangles. And on a 45, 45, you had the legs and the hypotenuse. And to find the hypotenuse, you would take the leg and multiply it by the root of 2. Then you would take the to find the leg, you would take the hypotenuse and divide it by the square root of 2. That was for 45, 45, 90. We also showed you 30, 60, 90. Where you had a short side, a long side, and a hypotenuse. To find the hypotenuse, you would take the short side and multiply it by 2. To find the long side, you would take the short side and multiply it by the root of 3. And to find the short, you could divide the hypotenuse by 2, or you could divide the long side by the root of 3. No. Then we have just finished covering basic trig and then inverse trig. Basic trig finds sides. Inverse trig finds angles. And the trig functions were sine, cosine, and tangent. Excuse me. My inverse trigs were the inverse of sine, the inverse of cosine, and the inverse of tangent. For the sine, it's going to be the sine times, or the sine of an angle, the sine function of an angle equals the ratio of opposite over hypotenuse. The cosine of an angle is adjacent over hypotenuse. And the tangent of an angle is the opposite over the adjacent. The inverse, you would use those same ratios, but you're multiplying the inverse operation. So the inverse of sine times the opposite over the hypotenuse equals an angle. The cosine, inverse of cosine, is the adjacent over the hypotenuse equals an angle. And the inverse of tangent times the opposite over the adjacent equals an angle. Okay. So you picked up a worksheet today that says solve triangles, solving right triangles. Number 1 has a triangle on it that looks like this. A, C, B, 6, and 8. Every triangle has 3 sides, 3 angles, and all 3 angles add up to 180 degrees. What I know from this diagram is that angle C is 90 degrees, CA is 6, BA is 8. What I need is angle A, angle B, and the distance between C and B. I can use any of the information from the front of my notes or the other page that we just finished of our notes to solve for this information. If I want to use Pythagorean Theorem, I could use Pythagorean Theorem. If I want to use trig, I can use trig. It doesn't matter to me what you use. If you do it correctly, they will all give you the same answers. The other thing I'll say is don't round until the very end. So if you get an answer that has a long decimal, then you're going to need to keep using that long decimal until you have found everything. Or I should say it like this. If you're going to find an answer for one part that you need that answer for the other part, then maybe do it a different way or don't round your answer because it will mess you up. I had students solving this earlier and they were getting 1/10 off when it was all said and done, and it would have been incorrect. Let me show you how you could solve this. The first thing I want to do is I want to find the measurement of angle A. Based on A, I have my adjacent, my hypotenuse, and this opposite side. I want to find angle A. To find an angle, I use trig, inverse trig. I've been given the hypotenuse and the adjacent, so I can take the inverse of cosine times my adjacent over my hypotenuse and solve for angle A. Inverse cosine 6/8, and I get 41.4. So my answer for angle A is 41.4. And that real answer is 41.40962211. Now I want to try to find angle B. There's two ways I can find angle B. I could use trig. Here's my adjacent. Here's my opposite, my hypotenuse. I've been given the opposite and the hypotenuse here. So I could say for angle B, it's going to be the inverse of cosine times 6/8. And that gives me 48 point, if I'm rounding there, 0.6, or that real number is 48.59037789. If my math is correct, angle C plus angle A plus angle B should all add up to 180 degrees. 90 plus 41.4 plus 48.6, and I get 180 degrees. I found my two angles and they are correct. To find CB, I could use Pythagorean Theorem. I have my hypotenuse and I have my either my A or B. I could say 8 squared should equal 6 squared plus B squared. Or as how y'all probably would prefer it to be written, 6 squared plus B squared equals 8 squared. That's 36 plus B squared equals 64. When I subtract 36 from 64, I get B squared equals 28. To get B totally by itself, I would take the square root of 28, which is going to give me 5.3. And that would work. I could have also, if I desired to, used trig. Based off angle A, CB is the opposite side of the triangle. I have the adjacent and I have the hypotenuse. I could use either one of those to make up the other piece of a ratio. If I chose to use the hypotenuse, I would say the sine of angle A, which is 41.4, is equal to x over 8, which is my hypotenuse. That is what the trig function would give me. When x is on top, I multiply by the denominator. Eight sine of 41.4 equals 5 point, and that would round to 5.3. And notice, here I use Pythagorean Theorem. Here I use trigonometry. They both gave me the same answer. Just to show you that you can use whatever you prefer to solve for the angles and the missing sides. For most of you, I would recommend sticking with trig and inverse trig. It's what we just learned. It is most fresh on our brain. For some of you, it's easier than the other stuff. Your work today is problems 2 through 8. It is due tomorrow when you come back to class. Your answers are going to look like this. Every one of those triangles have 3 things missing from it. So your answers are going to have 3 parts for each question. There you go.